Do you ever find yourself in one of those headspaces where you're just digging through video games of the past? Scouring through videos of top RPGs of the 90s and early 2000s, top roguelikes, scattered gaming discussions on various media sites and forgotten gaming forums? And in your aimless wanderings, finally, catch a glint of something that hits all your aesthetic sensibilities? That game that lights you up time after time when it pops up, yet for some reason or another, you just never delved into it? Brightis was one of those few games for me. It's a game that not only has the vibe of some mystical adventure into uncharted lands, but also makes use of dramatic lighting mechanics that accentuate the obscurity of its world and the game itself. It gives an air of breaking into something inaccessible. And for the longest time, as far as I was concerned, it was inaccessible. Because Brightis never made it out of Japan, remaining obscured behind a veil of Japanese text, dialogue, and menus. However, this only made it all the more enticing to me. In my stumbling around, trying to find a way to understand, well, anything in this game, it eventually came to light that, thanks to the times we live in, there are a number of very capable translation services available, which are able to perform on-screen text translation. So after manically poking around many of these services, I ultimately arrived at a feature of the Retroarch multi-system emulator called the AI service. What this basically provides is a way for you to press a button to capture an image of whatever game you're playing, send that image to a translation server, and receive captions in your language of choice, which are then overlaid on top of your game. The speed of this whole process is actually quite decent, usually taking around 1 second. While it's not something you'd want to use for action-oriented or time-sensitive text, it's great for character dialogue, menus, and other moment-to-moment text. Now, using the service does require you to have a server somewhere to handle translating any text, as Retroarch only really handles taking screenshots and displaying captions. What I did was use a server program called VGTranslate that runs locally on my PC. This processes the images and sends them to a website I used called ZTranslate, which handles the actual translation. This is all not too bad to set up and is completely free to use. All that's required is that you register on ztranslate.net, configure the VGTranslate server to use your account info, and you're in. Now, when translation is desired, all that's required is starting Retroarch and starting the translation server. I'll leave a tutorial in the description for anyone interested in trying this out themselves. Now, personally, when I got this working, I was euphoric that it actually worked. I prefer to be completely in a game when I'm experiencing it, and the thought of using a guide just to be able to play a game is off-putting. I don't like just inviting the global gamer brain to backseat my playthrough, and having the translation service really allows you to tap into the game yourself. It's almost like using the Book of Medora from A Link to the Past in real life. You can just walk up to anyone, talk to them, and immediately decrypt what they're trying to communicate to you. While it's not critical to progress at any point, it does clear up a lot of ambiguity or confusion in a few places. One instance of this is when you enter the weapon shop, but the blacksmith happens to be perusing the bookshelf. If you just run up and talk to him, without translation, he appears to just talk to you, then go back to what he's doing, seeming like he doesn't want to sell you anything at the moment. However, when you translate it, he's telling you that if you want to do any business, to please speak over the counter, and then he'll sell you something. I'm sure some players trying the game out of curiosity just spammed this interaction with him before giving up without figuring out what to do here. I mean, that basically summarizes my entire first attempt at playing this game. It's intimidating feeling like the game is trying to communicate things to you, and you just have no ability to parse it. Another instance where translation helps is when the character simply called the Witch is telling you about one of the optional dungeons. When translated, she gives you a bit of info on where the dungeon is and how it works, but the key thing she says here is that you should show her any treasure you find inside. Now, when you go and do this dungeon, if you make it far enough in, you'll come across an item called the Book of Confusion. When you bring this to the witch, she can actually use it to grant you access to the upgraded versions of all magic spells. And while translation isn't necessary for this sequence, as you could quite simply fumble your way through it by doing the optional dungeon and speaking to every NPC once you find the book, It's much more natural to have this quest in the back of your mind and then have that aha moment when you find the book. While the translations do have some grammatical hiccups on occasion, I find they overall are quite decent, and when they are off-key, they're close enough that you can easily get the gist of what is intended to be said. As for the gameplay itself, much of your time on the overworld is spent traversing to the next ruin, cave, or other landmark. Along the way, you'll fight off the local wildlife, demons, soldiers, and the like, traverse pits, as well as check every little corner for skill coins, which are key to upgrading your character's combat abilities. The combat itself is pretty straightforward. R2 will bring up your shield, which will block any attack from the front, completely negating damage. You do need to be aware of what's around you, as being attacked from the sides, back, or even being surrounded will stagger you and leave you defenseless. Certain strong attacks will also stagger you if they strike your shield, so you'll need to discern what attacks you can and can't block. Hitting X swings your sword. You can perform a variety of sword attacks depending on whether you're standing still, running, jumping, or crouching. Additionally, there are sword techniques which are performed using command inputs very much like a fighting game, and you have charge attacks, which are done by holding the charge button for a certain length of time. Each and every one of these sword attacks also has a number of variations which can be learned from one of the 3 sword mentors in town, allowing you to really go off and pick an attack style that works for you. And it's here where all the skill coins you'll be stumbling upon come into play, because the mentors will only teach you new techniques in exchange for a secondary type of experience called skill points. See, for every attack you perform on an enemy, you'll gradually build up a combo depending on what attack you use. Stronger attacks tend to raise the combo more, and some weak attacks will actually detract from your combo. Taking any damage will completely reset your combo to 0. Depending on how high your combo is, you'll be granted skill points anytime you strike an enemy. So keeping a high combo is key to obtaining more skill points and thus more sword techniques. As you're starting out, however, the maximum combo you're able to hold is quite low, and in order to raise your max possible combo, you'll need to find the numerous skill coins scattered throughout the overworld. So you're kind of incentivized to scrounge around in every corner of the world for skill coins as you travel from destination to destination, and they're pretty much always in the tiniest possible skill bags, which you'll only see if you're right next to them, meaning you will be running full into every nook if you intend to find all skill coins. The last aspect of combat I'll mention is magic. Magic spells are taught by the witch in her hut, and the player can learn 1 spell per global element that they've obtained. Each spell has its uses depending on what you're fighting, or if you just need healing, but need to be used somewhat sparingly. If you lean too hard on blasting off spells in every encounter, you may find yourself deprived of magic in a pinch, as spells cost MP to cast, which will slowly regenerate over time. In practice, these mechanics are very simple, yet still make for satisfying interactions where you have to pick apart enemy behavior and movement. The added variety of getting to pick and choose many of your moves through the mentors also makes for a good bit of experimentation, which I quite enjoy. There are some, in my opinion, OP moves, which I'll talk about in a bit, but overall the combat is adequate, and there's a good bit of play that happens in learning an enemy's movesets and figuring out how and when to use your own. Now, beyond the combat, your main draw for being in this land very quickly becomes obtaining the 4 global elements before the group of human-like demons, translated Noggles, can acquire the elements themselves and summon their king. And so you set out, searching the ruins of the land of Nord, seeking out any trace of the global elements. Within the many dungeons throughout Nord exists a pervasive and ever-present darkness. On stepping foot into one, your immediate goal becomes finding one of the many key elements to light your way. Key elements will act as both a light source for you and as a kind of small key. As you explore, you'll come across devices where you can, and will sometimes need, to insert key elements to open doors, operate mechanisms, and such in order to proceed. You may even have to juggle placing and reclaiming key elements from these devices because, in the event you place your last key element, you'll immediately find yourself enveloped in the darkness that fills the dungeon. Even having a key element doesn't guarantee you light, as the light stored in a key element quickly drains unless replenished. Refilling your light can be accomplished by standing in a light source, but in the absence of one, your only other option is through combat, either by striking an enemy or shielding an attack. Essentially, you are driven to keep moving and confronting whatever lies in the darkness to maintain your own light, and this is actually a pretty unique way to keep the player moving. You do have an item called a flare given to you early on, which can be used to fire a light projectile directly in front of you. However, its magic cost makes it unsustainable to rely on, other than when you're in a pinch. Your saving grace when your light begins to wane tends to be confronting whatever enemies you come across as you hold out for a light source, with enemies themselves sometimes even dropping small wisps of light which you can use to refill your own. Along with being a very unique gameplay mechanic, the light system strongly shapes the aesthetic of the game too. I myself am strongly drawn to game scenes with dramatic contrast between lit and darkened areas. There's a lot of intrigue when you enter a new room and don't yet know what's lurking just beyond your view. The act of mapping out a large space in your mind with only the light of flares before proceeding is just... I don't know, I enjoy it. I enjoy the process of coming to know the space well enough that there's an imprint of it in your mind, where you can proceed because you know what's there without needing to see what's there. A few other minor mechanics come into play besides the combat and exploration. Occasionally you'll come across invisible traps or items which can be revealed by checking the area in first-person view. You'll also come across a rock-breaking sword in your travels, which is seldom used to break through weak walls that you may discover. Finally, even once you overcome the main objective of each dungeon, you're still technically not done with it yet, because even after the darkness is cleared, your last goal is to safely find your way back out of the dungeon. This isn't solely a strict walk back the way you came, because the key elements still in your possession come into play one last time. This is because every dungeon has a number of chests that require key elements to open, which are sealed until the pervasive darkness has been cleared from the area. You'll often already have spotted a few of these on the way in, and some of them are certainly worth going back for, as they may contain powerful or unique items. In the end, the way your adventure progresses in Brightis is something that you don't see as often anymore. It's an experience emerging from the fact that you don't really get warped around all that much in this game. The aspect that your journey from one area to the next is almost entirely one long, uninterrupted excursion. The only warp points are the ones back to town, placed outside many of the main dungeons. And besides that, the only other breaks in focus away from the player are the black intro fade on entering a dungeon, and the occasional cutscene events taking place. Beyond that, it is continuously you, on your adventure, with the focus on the player and the player's actions. No loading fades, no fast traveling, just you, completely in control of where to journey next. I don't want to go too in-depth on any particular dungeon or the story itself, because I want to leave a little something for anyone that decides to jump in and just experience Brightis the way I have, but there are a few critiques I want to flesh out. While the combat is enjoyable for what this game is, the way skill points work can be exploited in some ways that feels somewhat monotonous at times. Due to skill points being awarded per hit regardless of damage dealt, the ideal way to gain lots of skill points is to equip the weakest sword and essentially stun lock enemies as often as you possibly can. Now, this does require you to figure out how to stun lock the various enemies, but once you do, there's really not much the enemies will do to stop you from just whacking them around, unless you mess up. Funnily enough, one of the sword mentors does mention using a weak weapon as a tactic to train more skill points, so it's not unintended by any means. It's just a little too easy sometimes to shut down an enemy and enter a very non-interactive game state. I'll also mention that for the final dungeon, they decided to go all out and make it the penultimate dungeon. They throw everything at you, asking you to use every skill and intuition you've developed to triumph. And it's a massive dungeon, almost too massive. On my recent second playthrough, it took me around 6 hours to do everything in this area, though that's partly to blame on me leaving after finding a shortcut to town, which meant I had to go through the whole beginning of the dungeon again to collect every key element. This overall isn't a big deal, as you can rest at save points and run through it in parts. It's just that navigating the place asks you to keep a much larger mental map of everything, as your map only displays the current room you're in, so it's possible to forget the way through certain areas if you decide to take it in pieces. Ultimately, these were minor nitpicks, and I still very much enjoyed my experience with Brightis. Besides these quirks, I do have to acknowledge the aesthetic appeal of the game's environments. It has a simple look where you have just enough detail to tell what things are. Nothing feels overly muddy, and there's a nice vibrancy to the overworld. Meanwhile, within the darkness, the lighting gives spaces a mystical, intriguing vibe. I also think the skyboxes are particularly gorgeous, for which you're presented with a handful of vista points to admire them throughout the overworld. There is one dungeon I want to give special mention to, which is the Grave of the Ancient Clan. While not one of the main dungeons, it attempts something I'm quite fond of, with that being it's a largely procedurally generated dungeon. It doesn't generate anything too major, but things such as the room layout, trap layout, and the objective for each floor are generated every time you move to the next floor. It makes for a very novel experience where you don't truly know what comes next, and this is actually one of the few places where I died in this game due to entering a floor and being blasted by a small dragon. Personally, the source of my enjoyment of Brightis is twofold. Having the capability to translate the game in near real time resonates both with me and the theme of Brightis as well. The translation service itself acts as an illuminating force enabling the journey. It's just an amazing thing to be able to use in this day and age, and using it to engage with a work I've long been aesthetically drawn to really lights some spark in my soul. The work and the tech just play off each other so well. Brightis itself is a pleasure to play, visually and mechanically. If you take the time to set up translation for it, it's a treat to experience, hitting similar vibes to the Castlevania and Legend of Zelda games of the era, while still being its own distinct brand of fantasy. It's still worth a play today, and is a shining example of a game that's simple, effective, and adventurous.